Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. I'm Joseph Lobosco, joined as always by my co-host Adrienne. And today we have a special guest host, Mekey. In this episode, we're diving into the notorious case of Bernie Madoff, the man behind what's been called the largest financial fraud in history. For decades, Madoff enjoyed a reputation as a self-made financial guru with the Midas touch. But in December 2008, that golden image imploded virtually overnight, revealing a multi-billion-dollar deception that devastated investors and numerous charities. And a quick disclaimer, myself, Adrienne, and Mekey, we are not attorneys, law enforcement officials, or psychologists, and none of the statements made during this show should be taken as financial advice. We research each case thoroughly, but this show is recorded live with minimal editing. Any factual errors are unintentional. Any individuals, businesses, or organizations mentioned who have not been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrienne, Mekey, or Debate the News.
And I am Mekey Gabriel. Thank you so much. So happy to be here tonight. How did Bernie Madoff manage to fool regulators, investors, and even his own family for so long? And what happened when his $65 billion house of cards finally fell? Tonight, we'll break down Madoff's saga in chronological order, from his rise on Wall Street to the secret fraud's beginnings, through its shocking collapse and aftermath. This is Debate the News, True Crime. Let's dive into the case timeline.
Amazing, Mekey. We are so glad to have you here. So we're going to start with early rise in credibility, 1960s to the 1990s. Madoff founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960 as a legitimate market-making operation. Over the years, he amassed extraordinary credibility, serving in senior industry roles and becoming chairman of the NASDAQ in 1990, the kind of resume that opens doors to high net worth investors and institutions. That credibility later insulated him from scrutiny and seeded trust in his private investment advisory business, which he told clients used a steady, conservative options overlay trading method.
So Madoff marketed a split strike conversion strategy, blue chip equities hedged with options, to explain smooth gains regardless of the market weather. But according to the SEC enforcement records, the strategy, it existed mostly on paper. His lieutenants generated fake trade blotters and account statements. Depository trust company reports were faked, and other phantom books to make non existent trading look real. Internal programs spat out like thousands of pages of fabricated records, and an isolated computer known as House 17, it processed the sham data.
And the red flags and the regulators. So this is from 2000 to 2008. And of course, we all know what happened in 2008. So years before this collapse, guys, detailed whistleblower submissions, including Harry Markopolis analysis, flagged that Madoff's numbers were mathematically impossible. The SEC's own inspector general later concluded that the commission received detailed and credible complaints, but never verified Madoff's trading with an independent third party and never conducted a true Ponzi examination, which is just outrageous, right? And it missed chances that might have unraveled the scheme earlier.
Then, in 2008, when the financial crisis triggered heavy redemptions, Madoff couldn't meet his withdrawals. On December 10th/December 11th, 2008, he confessed to his sons. When the FBI agents came to his apartment, he told them, quote, "There is no innocent explanation. I have been running a massive Ponzi scheme." He was arrested that same day.
So Madoff pleaded guilty on March 12th, 2009 to 11 federal felonies, including security fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail and wire fraud, money laundering, false statements, perjury, and theft from an employee benefit plan. And on June 29th, 2009, U.S. District Judge Denny Chin sentenced him to, ready, 150 years, calling the crimes extraordinarily evil. 170 billion forfeiture judgment was entered.
So, account statements in early December 2008 showed roughly 65 billion in supposed balances, right? So it's like what was real versus pay for profits. But the actual investor principal loss has been estimated by the court appointed trustee at about $17.5 billion. The rest was all fictitious profit. That 17.5 billion is the yardstick for the recovery effort run under the Securities Investor Protection Act, which is SIPA.
And beyond Bernie Madoff himself, prosecutors pursued employees and associates who helped cook the books. In 2014, a federal jury convicted 5 longtime BLMIS staffers. Later that year, 4 of them, Annette Bongiorno, Joanne Krupe, Jerome O'Hara, and George Perez, received prison terms ranging from 2.5 to 6 years, and Danielle Bonaventre received 10 years. Separately, Peter Madoff, the firm's chief compliance officer, pleaded guilty in 2012 and received 10 years.
Thousands of direct BLMIS customers and far more indirect investors through feeder funds watched their life savings evaporate. The personal toll was profound. Madoff's son, Mark, died by suicide in 2010, and his son, Andrew, died of cancer in 2014. Tragic chapters entwine with the scandal's fallout.
The trustees traced cash and sued net winners, feeder funds, and institutions. The largest single recovery came in 2010 from the Jeffrey Picower estate. $7.2 billion, described by prosecutors as the largest forfeiture in U.S. history at the time, which is insane. In 2014, JP Morgan, Madoff's longtime bank, entered a deferred prosecution deal. It admitted to its conduct, paid $1.7 billion to victims through the forfeiture, part of a broader $2.6 billion package, and agreed to AML, or anti-money laundering reforms.
Under SIPA, trustee Irving Picard has recovered or reached agreements to recover $14.8 billion for the customer fund and has distributed about $14.58 billion to customers with allowed claims. In February 2025, a 16th pro-rata distribution of $76.8 million went out. In June 2025, the trustee reached a court approval pending settlement with 2 Luxembourg funds to add an additional $498.3 million more to the customer fund and share in potential UBS case proceeds.
Definitely a lot of letters here, Joseph. So separate from the SIPA estate, the U.S. Department of Justice built the Madoff Victim Fund, and it was financed largely by forfeitures, including the JP Morgan resolution, and that was to compensate indirect victims who invested via the feeder funds or the intermediaries. So by late 2024, DOJ reported 4.3 billion distributed to 40,930 victims in 127 countries, reaching 93 to 94% of fraud losses for those eligible claims. The Department of Justice noted in April of 2025 that it had surpassed 12 billion in total compensation to Madoff's victims across programs.
After the SEC Inspector General's scathing 2009 reports on misread flags, the Commission tightened custody rules, mandating surprise exams for advisors with custody and enhancing auditor oversight, and launched a modern whistleblower program under Dodd-Frank, which has since become a major pipeline for tips. These are cornerstone reforms often traced to lessons from Madoff.
On April 14th, 2021, Bernie Madoff died at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina at the age of 82. His death capped a case that remains a touchstone for investor protection policy and public trust in markets.
So let's just give you a kind of a snapshot of where things stand now. So as of October 2025, said plainly, between the SIPA estate and the Department of Justice MVF, recoveries for victims direct and indirect, are historically large, though not uniform, and still ongoing in some matters. And Mekey, I had a personal connection to this. The friends of my parents that lost everything. Hadassah, a Jewish organization, lost a lot. So let's go into some discussion questions. Bernie had his two sons and I think a brother, right, that worked besides him. So do we believe they didn't know or they didn't want to?
I don't believe that his sons knew what was going on. I believe that he was a very highly intelligent, manipulative individual to carry something of this magnitude out. And this was back before the market went down, of course, in 2008 with the Great Recession. I just want to point out this might have still been going on, right? If we had not had that market crash and people were calling him asking for the funds outright that they had invested with him. This is the only reason, primarily, that he was caught and that we know of what happened. So, Adrian, he actually had two different kinds of businesses, which is why when we were reading, it says his advisory business. So that's going to function a little bit different than what's referred to as brokerage. Think of brokerage like your Merrill Lynch guy, right? You're buying some stock. It's in a brokerage account. You can log in, you get your statements from Merrill Lynch. This was his advisory business. So clients were giving him large sums of money for him to make investments in himself. So this was a side of the business known in the industry as something that is jurisdictioned a little bit different, so to speak. So yes, he was able to create his own statements. And I do think that this was something that he did not have a lot of people involved in, because had he had people involved that knew they could have gone to jail, known that it was highly illegal, he probably would have been challenged a lot more because he got away with this for quite some time. So I would say that he did not have his sons knowing what was going on and could have told them something simple like, don't touch things or you'll mess it up and nobody goes over there. It's quite simple. As remember, this was prior to 2008. We weren't as technologically advanced. So it's not that far reaching that his sons were kept completely in the dark. Other than that, dad was having some really good trading days.
The brokerage was kept completely separate from the advisory portion. I believe it was called Floor 17. And that was really the hub of where a lot of these crimes took place. He had a separate staff on Floor 17. They didn't really communicate with the brokerage, and the two arms didn't really know what the other were doing. And the two sons, even though they were heavily involved in the company, they were not even allowed on Floor 17. And some of the employees had stated that they were very frustrated that they didn't understand what went on in the advisory portion. So yeah, I agree with Mekey. I do not think that they knew.
But what about the wife? Do you think that she knew what was going on? And could she have not known, Mekey?
I will say that lots of times in a family, right, and we all know this, you have one spouse who is completely on top of everything, right? They know when the bills are paid, how much is paid, how much is in the 401k, how much, right, the kids' tuition is. And then you have one spouse, and this could actually be the spouse that's working or the spouse that just takes care of these things. They are completely oblivious, Adrian. In my marriage, it certainly was me, of course, and my wonderful husband at the time, he just came home and handed me his paycheck. He had no clue what the mortgage was. It is not a far stretch that she had no clue whatsoever. These had always been wealthy individuals, right? They lived that New York lifestyle, the Fifth Avenue, the penthouses, the, the nice dinners, right? He was very well esteemed in his community. He had been head of the NASDAQ, right? So they were already wealthy. If she noticed that, the furs came a little bit more, that the jewelry was a little bit nicer, the trips a little bit more extravagant, she probably really believed in her husband's ability to be the best at his craft. And I have to say, he actually was the best at his craft. There was just something in him that made a decision that he wanted more, and he found an absolute brilliant way to do it to the tune of defrauding $65 billion, dollars, which is why we call it the crime of the century, the biggest Ponzi scheme that we had known to that point.
Mekey, you put it together about the year 2008 and how it kind of started for him, where people were asking for their money back. Can you just be a little bit more information? Because I find it fascinating that he was taken down due to the economy.
Sure. So Bernie Madoff, what Bernie was promising is kind of like between 10 to 15% return on income. So a lot of wealthy clients, contrary to popular belief, and again, as was stated earlier, this is not financial advice. And me having worked with a lot of types of these clients over my 30 years in the industry, they're not looking for returns, they're looking for income. So if I had given $10 million to Bernie Madoff and he was promising me a 10% return annually, it was that my principal would not go down, right? But I would pretty much be able to withdraw $1 million every year, which is great for me if I'm wealthy because I'm not really having to risk my capital too much. Well, this is what Bernie was promising. But what we find happened in 2008, because again, he was well known within the Jewish community, he was well known within the investment community. So he had pension funds who typically do not like a lot of risky investments, right? So he had very wealthy people. He had institutional funds, which is those feeder funds and those intermediaries that we're talking about, right? There were people that invested in Bernie's fund through a third party, right? And then they took a haircut off. So maybe their clients received an 8% return versus the 10% return, right? And they kept the 2%. Well, what happened in 2008, as we know, the Great Recession, right? There was a debacle that went on also in the securities industry. And what we saw is that the stock market value fell. It was a big mess. It was a global consideration that happened. We had the car industries, the banks, right? We had lots of things happening. So what probably happened is if I gave him $10 million, that 1 million wasn't enough because now I maybe needed to spend 2 or 3 million out of that 10. So he started getting calls for liquidity is what we call it, Adrienne, right? People were like, "Well, thank you for that million a year," which he probably paid out quarterly, right? Or something like that, or at the end of the year, similar to some bonds or treasuries. And people were calling and saying, "Hey, can I get that 10 million back? I'll get it right back to you. But I've got to take care of some things, maybe in my investment account, or maybe I want to buy some property, or maybe I need to, take care of a mortgage or take care of a kid or something, right?" So that's what happened. And of course, he had that run on that money, which he never really invested. And that's when everyone found out the jig is up because he basically ran out of all the money to give to everyone. And that's how we found out, or he told us that there was this major Ponzi scheme that he had going on because he knew what he'd been doing all of those years.
It's almost unbelievable. Wow. Wow. I knew this, but I think every time we'll hear this, I'll always be shocked. So the SEC received warnings, right? They ignored them. So is this just Bernie Madoff's crime, or is it actually a failure of the system built to protect us?
I deal with regulators all the time. I'm a compliance person, but I would absolutely say that the SEC failed him. There is a brilliant documentary that's out. Vanity Fair has done some excellent detailed articles over the years. What we find, Adrian, is that a lot of the investigators who were sent, they did not do their due diligence. When investigators come, you're supposed to put them in the coldest room in the office, only bring them what they want. And typically, what that looks like is you provide them a list of your clients and then they randomly choose them, and then you're supposed to bring them the client folders, right? Especially back in 2008, everything was paper, so we have to think about the time frame involved. All of those years, let's just say there was an audit in 2000 or 2002, and they're supposed to go through everything. And when you have advisory accounts, from my experience, you scrutinize them a whole lot more because it's not on a Fidelity, it's not at a Charles Schwab, right? I can't just go to Fidelity or Schwab and get those statements. Sometimes the advisory firm is providing their own statements because of the types of investments. So someone should have been calculating those returns because, in my opinion, that was quite insane to have 10 to 15% return on income. Like, what in the world was he funding, right? Some deals that weren't legal. That in itself would have made me, what are you investing in again? And you've been able to produce this return for how many years? So definitely, and they admitted, Adrian, Joseph, and Debate the News True Crime audience, they admitted that a lot of times he basically was green lighted because they were so much in awe of this man who was so well known in the industry, right? Imagine if you're an entry or a brand new or a junior investigator and you are going to question the great Bernie Madoff, who's manages billions of dollars. Everyone was just like, Bernie's got it. Clients and compliance both, Adrian. So absolutely, which is why there were so many changes that were put in place due to what Bernie Madoff was able to get away with, especially in terms of those audits. Absolutely.
I do want to say that we are live on Chatter Social. So if you're listening to the podcast and wondering about some of the other voices that will speaking up, we do have people in the audience. And if anyone wants or has a question to ask Mekey, please speak up.
Yeah, I'm Laura Bernard. I worked on Wall Street as well as in finance for decades. Aspects of compliance have been put in place because people are greedy. And you see it in companies, small companies, big companies. It just happened in one of my predecessor companies. There's just rampant opportunities for greed when there's gaps in the system and people are not checking. But Mekey, what I would love to hear is, maybe you mentioned it before, but what are some of the 3 or 4 things that happened as a result in terms of compliance that are improvements that protect the individual investors as well as, high net worth individuals within the capital markets?
Right. I knew that that question was going to come up. So basically, they started to require independent surprise exams. Now, these are for, I'm going into a little bit of technical speak, but these are for investment advisors who have custody of client assets. So we saw custody in there. They weren't talking about a baby, right? We're talking about assets. So when an advisor has custody, that basically means that they are kind of doing their own thing. So think about it as if we are using Chatter Social as a third party versus if we actually own Chatter Social and are using our own platform, right? If we have an investment account that's at Schwab or Fidelity, as I explained earlier, Schwab or Fidelity is the custodian, even though I might be Joseph, Adrienne's, and Laura's financial advisor, just putting that in the universe. Oh, just kidding, right? So they're going to custody the assets. If I chose to custody them, I might use my own platform and then I would be making these investments on y'all's behalf, but I would quote unquote have custody. So not physical custody, but I would be making those decisions and I would be generating the statements. So for investment advisors, right? Because this is the part of his business he got in trouble in, because back in the day, you had complete autonomy pretty much over what you decided to do if you put your eggs in that little basket. So there are now independent surprise exams that happen. I've heard about them where basically you're just going about your day. And then there's, a couple of people in some suits and briefcases that come in your office and they say, hey, we're from the SEC and we're here to do an audit. And it's like, whoa, okay, so that is a surprise audit that was implemented. In addition, they strengthened the oversight of broker dealers. So they authorized cash bounties for whistleblowers, which I think is very important. Some people need to be incentivized for whistleblowing, especially in wealth management, because it's a very small world, as we know with a lot of businesses. Everyone is quick to figure out who said what, who worked at what firm. And of course, these individuals, although they do the right thing, they are punished by the industry because then nobody is going to hire that whistleblower. So I absolutely applaud and promote the idea that they should be financially incentivized if the information that they are reporting turns out to be true and we find out that there's some, fraudulent activity going on. They also wanted to prohibit mandatory arbitration clauses in customer contracts, Laura. Now that has actually not happened. And it's funny, I was speaking about this earlier today because we know in a lot of the new account paperwork that you have, there are clauses that may say that you have to go through arbitration with the custodian, such as Schwab or Fidelity, not meaning to pick on them. They're just some of the most well known, versus being able to outright sue, right? Because if you think about it, we don't hear a lot of cases, where people are suing financial advisors, they're suing custodians because there's a lot of arbitration clauses mixed in there. So sorry that we had to get a little technical there, right? But that is what we're talking about when it comes to what the SEC and which it was NASD at the time, which is FINRA, has kind of put into place, and just being more aware and making sure that they absolutely do those audits and fact checking that information when it gets back to the office. Great question.
I would like to understand if you can explain this to me, like I'm a 12-year-old, the clawbacks. What exactly was that, and how was that used to pay back the victims?
Right. So the clawbacks were basically, they found that certain individuals benefited more than others from this Ponzi scheme, right? Because in these situations, what we have to understand with this fraud, it is fraud for a reason, and someone really, really, really benefits. So basically, clawback meaning you've received these funds, whether that is a payment, whether that is a commission, whether that is interest payments, and we're now going to confiscate this money. So that is basically a clawback, right? We use that term because essentially, think about it, I'm dragging my nails, I'm clawing it back. You have it, I'm taking it back, right, by force. So it is a clawback. And what we find, and I love JP Morgan Chase, but a lot of these compliance issues, as we saw, Adrienne, if we delved a little bit into it, somebody probably allowed something that was not allowed per bank compliance, which is why we see that that one estate of that one individual, they had to give that money back because it was fraudulent. And there was even something that we did not discuss, but I wrote down for us doing this room tonight. Um, his wife, Ruth, initially she had $10 million in assets that was in her name. But by the time that this was all said and done, she was only allowed to retain 2.5 million because it was determined that a lot of those other funds were probably ill-gotten gains from what her husband had been doing with other people's money. So that is what that means, Adrian. They basically took that back and confiscated it and said, you don't get to keep this because you benefited from these financial crimes, whether or not you were aware. And I do have to make that point. It does not matter, such as his wife, it does not matter if she was aware. There was a determination that they were received from what was going on. And since that was fraudulent, they were absolutely clawed back.
Obviously, there were so many people who were defrauded by him. A lot of people have gotten at least a portion of their money back, which is great. But were they deceived completely, or did some of them maybe choose denial? For me, I think most people were deceived. This was a professional con man, but there were so many red flags. And there was one individual in particular who was in finance. He had all of his money in Madoff. He had all of his family's money in Madoff, and he had a lot of his high-profile financial contacts in Madoff. And the whistleblower, Harry Markopoulos, sat down with this individual, laid it all out for him, and said, this is a Ponzi scheme. This is a fraud. And this man didn't listen, and he wound up losing a ton of his money. So what do we think? Was everyone just an innocent victim, or did some people kind of choose to look the other way?
I do think we have to look absolutely at some of these individuals because promising this amount of return during that time, it's fairly difficult. So you did have some individuals who, for example, put second mortgages on their home, Joseph, right? These were Palm Beach multimillionaires, billionaires in some cases. Did they exactly need those funds? No, I'm not talking about the pension funds. I'm not talking about the widows. I'm not talking about the individuals who were duped into this by feeling overwhelmingly grateful for putting their 250,000 when there were people who had invested hundreds of millions of dollars. But I think we do have to look at what is sometimes considered market greed or gambling greed, right? Which is why sometimes you can get a little bit too involved in returns versus what a professional would do, which is basically say, okay, we're here, we want to land here, let's start investing for the long term so then you can achieve this long term goal. I will say this, and I'm being an auntie and a mom and a financial professional in this moment, but sometimes bad things can happen if it sounds too good to be true. What our grandmothers and our mothers told us all the time. Sometimes it really is too good to be true. It just seemed like a fantasy world for these investors, unfortunately. But this man was absolutely majority responsible, and he was just diabolical. So intelligent, so crafty, so manipulative that he managed to get away with undoubtedly the crime of the century. Absolutely.
And it really was a fantasy because at the end of the day, he never invested any of that money. He took all the money that was coming in, he put it in a bank account, and everything was fake. Not a single trade was ever made. So it's crazy. And I agree. A lot of people didn't know better. They're not financially literate, or they just trusted the wrong people. And to those people, I don't put any responsibility on them. But there were definitely people who should have known better, who were financially literate, who did see the red flags clearly. And yeah, I think got a little bit greedy or had a little bit of cognitive dissonance. No one deserves to get scammed, but you got to do your due diligence if you're going to be investing an obscene amount of your own money or someone else's money. So Madoff really capitalized on bringing people in by using almost like emotional manipulation. He had this almost you're lucky to be investing type mentality. People would come to him and he would actually turn down their investments because it wasn't enough money. And when people would ask questions, a lot of the times he would just say, okay, well, if you have that many questions, then just take your business elsewhere. So he kind of employed this manipulative strategy to reel people in and keep people in. Why do you think smart people fall for that kind of emotional manipulation and ignore blatant red flags just because they want to feel like they're being part of this exclusive investment fund?
It's definitely the allure. And I can answer this, from a professional and a personal standpoint. It is definitely the allure, right? We see this in marketing a lot. If you can create a product that has exclusivity, then you are literally creating consumer demands, and then you're just grateful to get in. So you're going to overlook those red flags, right? And this happens, we see this a lot with Birkins, for example. It's an excellent marketing strategy because it basically sells itself, right? There's a wait list. So when the time comes around and you're offered a Birkin, and I love you, Birkin, we're just using you as an example. We'll say Burbina, not Birkins, right? And you're offered this bag, and it might, be $20,000. A lot of people are going to purchase that bag at the opportunity because it's like this opportunity may not come again. And it's actually very sad, Joseph. And I just wanted to reference, for example, the magnitude of individuals that invested with this man. Carl Shapiro, who is founder of women's clothing brand K Windsor. There was also Fred Wilpon, former owner of the New York Mets. Steven Spielberg, we all know who that is. Jeffrey Katzenberg, co-founder of DreamWorks Pictures. Mortimer Zuckerman, chairman and editor-in-chief of U.S. News and World Report, publisher of New York Daily. Larry Silverstein, famous for helping develop the World Trade Center. Leonard Feinstein, co-founder of Bed Bath & Beyond. Eric Roth, screenwriter for Forrest Gump and A Star is Born. Larry King, the television host, right? Frank Wattenberg, former U.S. Senator. Norman Brahman, former owner of the Philadelphia Eagles. Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick. Zsa Zsa Gabor, John Malkovich. Sandy Koufax, Hall of Fame picture, right? Phyllis George, Miss America 1971. And this man was such that and I was talking about this earlier, that it was almost like widows were, if just have Bernie take care of it. That's what they would kind of say. Oh, I'm with Bernie. Let me see if I can get Bernie to do it. So it was almost like this exclusive country club.
With the Madoff situation, a lot of families were involved. The Ponzi schemes are always around, like one family member, you trust your family member, and then sometimes it's a lot of friends and family that tell you about all these good things. And I think Madoff had a lot of people invested in him who were families too.
What I will say is, just because it works for your family, your friend, your whomever, right? It's kind of like taking someone else's medication. Do you have the same symptoms? You sure might. You may even have the same doctor. Does that mean that you would just take their medication? Absolutely not. I know that seems very silly, but this is absolutely something that we should look at, because just because that worked out as a wonderful investment for them and they made money, that just may not align with your overall financial goals or even the level of the volatility that you can stand in a market, which is why due diligence is necessary and personal finance is what, everybody? Say it with me. Personal. That's why y'all let me say it by myself, right? Because personal finance is personal.
Exactly, Mekey. Yeah, that's a great tip.
I lost 41,000 US dollars in a Ponzi scheme because my sisters in Jamaica during that time, a lot of Ponzi schemes were going on that time, right? So during that time, one of my sisters messaged me and well, we were talking, and they were always talking about guy who used to work at Jamaica Money Market Brokers. He created his own company after that. They kind of knew the guy because he was working at JMMB, so maybe he was a good advisor over there. And then he started this business, this company, and they were talking about investing in it because they knew him and they were talking about it. I just figured I used to work in Jamaica, so I had some money. When they take out your money, the government put it in housing trust. And then because you didn't buy a house through the housing trust, you get back your own money. Okay. So I went out to Jamaica one time. Took the money. I converted it to US dollars. I put it in the bank. And then I had some more money in another account that I said, let me take some money out of it and invest in that guy and see how it goes. It's kind of when you invest some money and you kind of might lose it, but you don't expect to lose it. So we put that money in there. And the hard thing is, one of my sister had just sold her house. She took the whole of her money and put it in there. At the end of the day, she lost everything, the whole of the money that she sold her house. She was going to buy another house and put it in that Ponzi scheme. We didn't know it was a Ponzi scheme. So every month I would get a thing about how much interest you make on it. I even kept my own spreadsheet. Holy shit, at the end of the day, the guy was taking other people's money and paying other people. In the beginning, if you didn't take any interest, your money was in there. That went kaput. But some people had actually taken some of the interest. Now, the way I operate, and I still operate that, if I put money down, trust me, guys, I don't touch it. I have money in the system for more than 40 years that I haven't touched yet. So that money was going to stay there until maybe I say I retire because this looks interesting, right? The goddamn man was a Ponzi. So I lost money. My eldest sister lost money. I think all of us who had some money lost some money. Christ. The thing is that I would not have put all my money in there. I would not have sold my house and put all my money in there like one of my sisters. But, I was just trying it out. I heard that they knew the guy. They think they knew the guy and all that and all that. But many of these things happen because you listen to family and neighbors. I'm telling you, that period of time was the Ponzi era. It was crazy. Ponzi in Canada, Ponzi in Jamaica, Ponzi in the States, Ponzi, Ponzi, Ponzi. You got to beware and do your due diligence, because I'm telling you, don't listen to no damn family and don't listen to friends. That is what I got to tell you guys. But you all didn't know that I put a little bit of money in a Ponzi. There you go. Anyway, I only lost 41,000 US dollars, guys. So it wasn't a whole ton of money. So I'm good. But Christ Jesus. Anyway, my sister is good. She bought another house with her son. They're living happily ever after. But my God, her first house, she lost every damn thing in a Ponzi scheme. That was crazy.
That's awful, awful.
Would you like to hear my Bernie Madoff story? It's not like many that I've heard described over the last many minutes I've been in here. I didn't know I was invested in something with Bernie Madoff until the story broke and my financial advisor sent me a letter telling me they had invested in Madoff. It was buried so deep There's no way, because I looked at it after the fact, there's no way I would have ever figured it out had they not, well, they had they not contacted me. And then I went through years of trying to recover my money through the Victim Relief Fund, which was very interesting because I think I did finally get all my money back after I think around 8 or 9. But it was interesting because it was almost like every round you had to reapply again. And there was a very short window. They'd send a letter and say, do you want to participate in round 6, round 7, round 8? And you had a very short amount of time to fill out all the paperwork and send it back in. And of course, I didn't do it by email because I didn't trust it. So I sent, it through the post office, got a signature confirmation, the whole thing, because I wanted it to be really tight documentation. But it literally took years, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it all back. But I did eventually get all my money back. And there you go. That's my Bernie Madoff story. Totally unaware.
I'm so sorry that that happened, Anne, but taking 8 or 9 years, so that was lost time that it could have been invested, and that's why I'm saying for those victims, did they get their principal back? Absolutely. But that's why
Yeah.
this was so terrible, guys. So I'm so glad you got that initial investment back, Anne, but isn't that just terrible? And we talked about that, those feeder funds and those intermediaries. So he was pretty far reaching. Absolutely.
He was busy. Well, and to your point, Mekey, I mean, yeah, that all that time I could have had the money invested otherwise, but it was also just the time sink of having to fill out the paperwork regularly because, it was very rigorous and I appreciated their rigor, but wow, it was a lot. It was a huge investment of time. And again, I look, I'll say at my account after the fact to see if there was some way I could have known this, some way I could have prevented it. But honestly, it was buried so deep. There's just no way I would have ever known.
And that happened to a lot of people. A lot of people who lost money didn't even know that they were invested in Madoff as a result of these feeder funds. So yeah, there's no way you could have even known that.
So when you talk about feeder funds, are you saying that you invest with an organization and then they would invest your money and don't even tell you about it? Is that what the feeder funds were from legit investment organizations investing in the Madoff fund?
Totally legitimate company, financial advisors, very, very traditional. And, I mean, when you've got financial advisor investing your money, I mean, it goes a lot of different places and it's all kinds of different investments. And some are stocks, of course, that you recognize, but there's other funds that, there's a lot of layers to them, as it turns out. And to be honest, I don't even know if they knew really. I mean, they're very tight-lipped about it. They wouldn't really talk about it after they sent me the letter because, of course, I called them. And they didn't really want to discuss it. They just told me the process for trying to recover the money. And they did provide some initial information, but after that, it was all on me. They didn't try and recover the money. That was my responsibility. So it was an interesting process.
So let's just say that you're investing in a Vanguard fund for income, right? Which is what that return of income was. And then you don't necessarily know all of the different things that that Vanguard fund is invested in. So that is what we would call like a feeder fund, right? It's like an intermediary. So you're not directly investing with them, but something that you're investing in has funds invested in one of those funds. And that's actually quite common. It's not illegal, but it was just unfortunate that he turned out to be such a con man.
This has been a great conversation. Mekey, you're fantastic. We love having you. Before we close out, I know Adrienne wanted to speak about some lessons in education.
Mekey, would you mind? Because I feel like I would be just reading it, and it's not financial advice. We're not saying that, but just an education checklist. Would you mind, Mekey, going through that? Lessons in education?
No, absolutely not.
Thank
And
you.
I will say you're welcome that Adrian's list is just wonderful. So absolutely. So what can we all do right now to protect our money and peace of mind? This is an education checklist, as she said, not financial advice, but diversify. Never one firm, never one advisor, right? As long as you are keeping track of everything, right? A lot of people find a lot of peace with this. And absolutely, this is certainly an option for you. Verify statements with the actual financial institution. This is a big one. I love this. Make sure that you have the app. Make sure that you have a login, right? There is also something called trusted person, a trusted contact. For example, let's just not think about ourselves. What about mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, our aunties, even our besties that may be single? You may want to have that trusted contact there. So if something happens, maybe you were incapacitated, someone else can take a look and be a trusted contact for your financial professional as well as yourself. Just make that decision on your own, right? Insist on transparency and audited records. Absolutely. You should be able to see, what have I contributed to this account? When did I make a contribution to this account, right? They are required to keep records, especially all of the big custodians, right? Similar to your bank, you should be able to make a request, right? And see what the returns are, what the fees are. That is the transparency. Someone should be able to tell you when you're looking at a statement what exactly the distributions are, right? So forth and so on. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Real professionals welcome them. I will say absolutely. One of my favorite things to get was questions, because you know what? If I'm just going on and on and on and the world is lovely and everything is great, I'm probably not doing my job, because we can get into the weeds if need be, right? But sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. So, absolutely, you are doing your financial professional a benefit. And even if you were not working with a financial professional and you are investing on your own, make sure you're calling that custodian. Make sure you're looking on the website, right? Make sure you're asking the questions. What happens if? What happens when? Because it may be another piece of paper that you need to sign. Or let's just say, if you think I'm a wife and I automatically have access to my husband's account. No, you don't. Not if it's in his name. There may be something else that you need. So, absolutely, come up with a checklist for yourself and ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable with your financial advisor, which is a whole other conversation, you might just want to call that custodian and ask them. And Fidelity, Schwab, Ameriprise, etc., will be more than happy to help you. Check credentials and disciplinary records publicly. Absolutely. You can go to FINRA. I believe it's .gov. You can look up an advisor. You can see what securities licenses they hold. You can also see their disciplinary records. You can also look up to see if someone has an insurance license. You're going to go to the state and you can look up state insurance licenses, and it will absolutely give you that information. Be wary of exclusivity and urgency language. Absolutely. We have all seen on social media those emails and those communications that we get. Hi, this is the IRS. I need you to pay this bill or I'm going to come and get you, right? Hi, this is such and such. If you just give me $400, I'll make you a millionaire in 2.5 seconds. Absolutely not. If it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Confirm independent oversight each year. Absolutely. Make sure that you are doing your annual reviews, your quarterly reviews, right? You should absolutely be looking at these things. Were there changes to your family? Should there be changes to your investment? Are you getting ready to retire? Are you getting ready to change states? Are you having a child? Are you purchasing a house? Are you becoming an entrepreneur, right? Have you fallen ill? So forth and so on. Absolutely. Make sure that you are looking at these things. The better communication you have with yourself in your finances and your financial professional, the absolute better outcomes I wish for everyone. That was excellent. Back to you, Adrienne.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so much smarter than having me read it. Thank you for everything you added into it. Thank you so much. We love you. Tim said this, and I just want to make this clear, Mekey, and if you have anything to add, Ponzi schemes are not always MLMs. There are publicly traded MLMs on the US stock exchange. The SEC has specific criteria to Ponzi schemes definition. I just want to make sure that that was a distinction. Tim had put that. Do you have anything to add to that, Mekey?
Like Avon is considered an MLM, right? That's just like a phrase that we use, but we know what a Ponzi scheme is. You're taking money in and paying out others, and that's why we call it a Ponzi scheme, right? So those programs get a bad name. But, shout out to my grandmother who absolutely was an Avon salesperson, where you bring people into the hierarchy, so forth and so on, right? Those are absolutely legitimate. So, yes, we need to be careful in what we call a Ponzi scheme. And if you are not sure of one, go ahead and re listen to this podcast and share it with your friends and family so that we can all have an understanding of exactly what one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history looked like and how it went down.
Amazing answer, Mekey. Oh, so wonderful to have you. Joseph, thank you for setting this up. So, in closing, the Bernie Madoff case remains a sobering reminder of how even the most respected figures can orchestrate devastating frauds. Financial crimes aren't victimless paper shuffling, they destroy real lives. This case has changed how we think about trust in the financial system, and it underscores the importance of skepticism when returns seem too consistently good to be true.
Absolutely. And as a guest co host, I've found revisiting this case both fascinating and deeply unsettling. It does make the good guys look very bad. The Madoff scandal forced reforms and shined the light on the need for better due diligence, absolutely, both by regulators and investors themselves, right? Because he or she may go to jail, but those losses are going to have deep implications for all of those individuals who lost funds. It's encouraging to see that roughly 94% of victims' losses have been recovered, which is absolutely wonderful, a silver lining in an otherwise tragic story. But beyond the dollars and the cents, the emotional damage and lost confidence are harder to repair. Hopefully, telling this story and debating its lessons will help prevent future schemes and encourage a culture of transparency and accountability in finance. Amen and hallelujah to that.
Yes, amen, Mekey. And thank you so much for joining us. So much great information. Adrienne, I would definitely love to have you back on another episode. So start thinking about another case you might want to do, because this has been fabulous. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, one of the most infamous true crime stories in the financial world. We hope this breakdown has shed light on how the fraud began, grew, and collapsed, and why it matters today. Be sure to subscribe to Debate the News True Crime for more comprehensive case breakdowns and discussions. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and have a good night.